There's a type of person who can spend 3 hours going down a rabbit hole about medieval bread, forget to eat lunch, lose their keys for the fourth time this week, and somehow still be the most interesting, creative problem solver in any room they walk into. You probably know someone like this, or maybe you just quietly recognized yourself. And here's the thing. Society genuinely cannot make up its mind about these people. One minute it's a superpower, the next it's a disorder. A gift, a disability, an excuse, an explanation. Depending on who you ask and what day it is, it's all of those things or none of them. But the actual psychology, the neuroscience behind how these brains work, it's more fascinating than any of those labels. And once you understand it, a lot of things about yourself, about someone you love, about why certain people seem wired completely differently from everyone around them, are finally going to click. These brains are not broken versions of a normal brain. They're a completely different build, and that difference shows up everywhere in ways both remarkable and deeply frustrating. Psychologists call it the spiky profile. Unlike neurotypical brains, where cognitive abilities tend to cluster around a similar level, neurodivergent brains show dramatic variation, scoring in the 98th percentile in some areas, while genuinely struggling in others that most people never think twice about. The same person who can solve a problem nobody else in the room could crack might also struggle to do something most people considered basic. And it's that struggle, not the brilliance, that tends to define how the world sees them. Most people assume that neurodivergent people, whether that's ADHD, autism, dyslexia, or any number of other conditions that fall under that umbrella, can't focus, easily distracted, unreliable. And that assumption is where the whole conversation goes wrong. But researchers have started asking a different question. What if it's not a deficit at all? What if it's just a tension that runs on completely different terms? Because here's what actually happens when a neurodivergent brain locks onto something it genuinely cares about. It doesn't just focus, it enters a state that most neurotypical brains cannot access on demand. Hours of complete immersion, no effort required, no clock watching, no distraction. Scientists call this hyperfocus, and studies confirm that people with ADHD experience it at significantly higher levels than the general population. Think about what that actually means. The same person who genuinely cannot sit through a 40-minute meeting can write, build, research, or create for 12 hours straight without noticing time pass. Not because they forced themselves, but because their brain found its signal. The issue was never that they couldn't focus. It's that the world kept asking them to focus on things their brain wasn't built to care about. But here's the part that doesn't make it into the inspirational posts. Most neurodivergent people spend an enormous amount of energy every single day performing neurotypicality, scripting conversations in advance, suppressing physical responses, memorizing social cues that other people absorb automatically without ever being taught them, making eye contact at the right moment, laughing at the right beat, modulating their voice so it doesn't give anything away. Psychologists call this masking, and it isn't occasional. For a lot of people, it runs from the moment they wake up to the moment they're finally alone and can stop. What makes it even harder is this. The better someone is at masking, the longer they go without a diagnosis or any support at all, because they look fine. They seem to be coping. The performance is convincing enough that even the people closest to them have no idea there's a performance happening. And that invisible performance has a cost most people never see coming. But there's also something deeply ironic about it. The very act of masking, tracking every microexpression, processing every social cue, running a constant mental simulation of how to appear normal, requires an extraordinary level of cognitive sophistication. These are not simple brains struggling to keep up. They're complex brains exhausting themselves pretending to be simple. Neurodivergent brains process patterns differently. Not worse, differently. Autistic brains tend toward precise structural detection, noticing errors, inconsistencies, and broken systems that everyone else walked past without blinking. ADHD brains do something else. They connect unrelated dots at speed, pulling together ideas from completely separate domains in ways that produce unexpected solutions. Dyslexic brains often see the full architecture of something before anyone else has even assembled the individual pieces. A Rand Corporation report found these strengths: pattern recognition, systems thinking, deep memory, and the ability to hyperfocus on a problem valuable enough that defense and intelligence organizations actively recruit for them. Companies like IBM and EY have built entire programs around hiring neurodivergent talent specifically because the cognitive output is different in ways that matter. This isn't feel-good rebranding, it's organizations following the data. And it connects to something evolutionary science has been quietly making the case for. These brains weren't produced by accident. In nomadic communities, ADHD traits, hyper-awareness, rapid environmental scanning, a willingness to take risks, were survival advantages, not liabilities. Autistic traits, exceptional memory, deep specialization, precision and craft, made those individuals essential to the group. The research suggests cognitive diversity wasn't a bug in human development, it was insurance. What it doesn't account for is the daily cost of living in a world designed for a completely different kind of brain. That cost has a name, and it's the one that tends to ambush people. Neurodivergent burnout is not the same as regular burnout. The source isn't overwork, though overwork can accelerate it. The real driver is something more insidious: the sustained cost of operating in an environment that was never built to accommodate how these brains actually function. What it looks like from the outside: someone pulling back from relationships, becoming harder to reach, seeming flat or disconnected. What it feels like from the inside: losing the ability to mask at all, worsening memory, tasks that were manageable becoming impossible, a creeping sense that you've lost track of who you actually are underneath everything you've been performing. Recovery can take months, in severe cases, years. And because it looks so much like depression from the outside, it gets misdiagnosed constantly, which means the treatment often misses the actual cause entirely. The people most at risk are the ones who held it together the longest, the high maskers, the ones who were so good at performing fine that nobody, including themselves, saw it coming. Here's what makes that even more complicated. There's a specific kind of pain that neurodivergent people rarely talk about because it's almost impossible to explain without sounding like you're making excuses. You know exactly what you need to do. You want to do it. You've thought about it. You've planned it. And your brain simply will not start. Not sometimes, regularly, for tasks that genuinely matter to you, that you care about completing, that you've been thinking about for days. From the outside, this looks like laziness, avoidance, not caring, and the neurodivergent person usually agrees with that assessment, which is the part that does the most damage, because they're not being lazy. What researchers describe as executive dysfunction is a measurable difference in how the prefrontal cortex coordinates intention with action. The starter motor runs on different fuel. Interest, urgency, novelty, or emotional stakes, those are the triggers that work. Arbitrary deadlines and sheer willpower often don't. The shame spiral this creates is relentless. You know you're capable, other people know you're capable, and the evidence keeps suggesting otherwise, with no explanation that doesn't sound like an excuse. This is also one of the main reasons late-diagnosed adults describe their pre-diagnosis years the way they do, not just as hard, but as years spent quietly convinced they were fundamentally broken in some way they couldn't name or explain. Which brings us to the part that actually matters. The problem was never the brain. The problem is the mismatch between a brain and the environment it's been handed. Open offices, standardized testing, rigid schedules, social scripts with unspoken rules, linear systems that reward consistency over intensity. None of these were designed with cognitive diversity in mind, and the people who struggled inside them got labeled disordered, as if the label lived in the person and not in the gap between the person and the system. The honest version of the superpower narrative isn't that neurodivergent people are secretly superhuman. That framing just creates a new kind of pressure. Perform at an extraordinary level or you've failed even the positive story about yourself. That's not liberation, that's a different cage. And the honest version of the disorder narrative isn't right either. It flattens something genuinely complex and genuinely varied into a checklist of deficits. It misses everything the research has been accumulating about what these brains can do when the environment meets them where they are. The more accurate picture is this: a different operating system, powerful in the right context, difficult in the wrong one, requiring real support, not just a better label. If you've spent years feeling like you were too much in some ways and not enough in others, like you kept failing at things that seemed effortless for everyone around you, the research doesn't say you were broken. It says the room was built for someone else. If any of this explains something you've been carrying around for years without a name for it, a late diagnosis, an early one, or just a moment in this video where something finally made sense, tell us in the comments below. Whatever the case, you might want to stick around, as the next video is going to feel familiar too.